It started, I think, with a certain glaze that came over everything. Our life, our tidy three-bedroom in a neighborhood of mature oaks, even the sound of Thomas's key in the door after work, it all developed a thin, imperceptible film. Like I was looking at a familiar painting that had been varnished by a stranger's hand. We were fine. We were Eleanor and Thomas, married for 12 years, parents to a wonderful, chaos-bringing golden doodle named Bruno. We had the comfortable rhythm of two people who've built a shared language of inside jokes and silent compromises. Thomas was always a confident man. It was one of the things that drew me to him. He had a way of shaping the world around his certainty, making decisions, from which mortgage lender to use to what to order for the table, with an ease that felt like shelter. Lately, though, his confidence had taken on a new, polished quality. He'd updated his wardrobe, not drastically, but enough for me to notice the sharp cut of a new blazer, the expensive gleam of leather boots. He'd taken up running again, coming home with the vibrant, spent energy of a man pleased with his own discipline. Just trying to beat the dad bod before it beats me, he'd say, grinning that easy grin, kissing my forehead. He was lying. Not about the running, but about the *Y star. The glaze was there, in the space between the reason he gave and the energy he carried home. It was in the way his phone, which once lived on the coffee table, now slid into his pocket with a deliberate, silent click. It was in the late-night text that buzzed, making his screen glow like a tiny beacon on his nightstand, and the way he'd say, work. It's relentless, without looking up from the response he was tapping out. I told myself I was imagining things. That this was the natural entropy of a long marriage, where mystery is replaced by knowing, and the knowing can sometimes feel dull. I was busy with my own work, my own friends, the small ecosystem of our home. But the glaze persisted, a faint distortion at the edge of my vision. I'd find myself watching him as he laughed at something on his phone, a private, quick laugh that wasn't offered to me. The air in our house, once simply quiet, began to feel quietly occupied. I began a new, pathetic ritual, sniffing his shirt collars when I did the laundry, searching for a scent that wasn't his cologne or the dry cleaner's chemical tang. I found nothing but cotton and the faint, familiar smell of my husband. The absence of evidence felt, somehow, like another kind of proof. It was the proof of my own creeping suspicion, a sour seed taking root in my gut. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what, or how deep it went. And Thomas, my confident Thomas, moved through our days with a smooth, untroubled grace that made me feel like I was the one going mad. What was I missing? The discovery wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lipstick stain or a passionate love letter. It was a piece of paper, a silent, crumpled witness in the pocket of his grey trousers. I was gathering laundry for the wash, my mind on the grocery list, my fingers automatically patting down pockets for forgotten pens or coins. In the right front pocket of his favorite chinos, the ones he'd worn 2 days prior for a supposed client dinner, I felt the crackle. I pulled it out. A receipt. From the Oyster Bar, a place I knew was 40 minutes south, near the waterfront, a place we'd never been together. The total was staggering. 2 glasses of a Burgundy I recognized as expensive. Oysters Rockefeller. Seared scallops. A chocolate torte. Asterisk date, Tuesday. Time, 8:14 p.m. Asterisk. Tuesday. The night he'd come home at 11:30, smelling vaguely of rain and mint, his explanation smooth as silk. The dinner ran long, then traffic was a beast on the bridge. You know how it is with the Henderson account. He'd kissed me, his lips cool, and asked if Bruno had been walked. I remembered feeling a pang of loneliness that night, sitting on the sofa watching a show I can't even recall, the empty house feeling too large. He'd seemed tired, but a good tired. A productive tired. Now, holding the receipt, the numbers and items became a brutal, flashing menu of his betrayal. 2 glasses of wine. Not a bottle. 2 individual glasses. The intimacy of that choice, you don't share a bottle with a client, you order one. You share a bottle with someone you're trying to impress, to relax. Oysters. Scallops. Food that is sensual, shared, picked it across a small table. The chocolate torte, a single dessert, I imagined, with 2 forks. A cold clarity washed over me, rinsing away the glaze. This wasn't anxiety. This was data. I sat down on the edge of our bed, the receipt trembling in my hand. I heard the crunch of the paper, my own grip tightening. The sounds of the neighborhood, a lawnmower, a child's shout, seemed to come from another planet. In our quiet bedroom, with its framed photos of us hiking in Colorado, with Bruno between us, a new reality was assembling itself with horrifying precision. Thomas hadn't been stuck in traffic. He'd been 40 minutes away, feeding oysters to another woman, drinking wine, sharing a dessert. The confidence he'd carried home wasn't from closing a deal. It was from something else entirely. I didn't cry. I just stared at the receipt, memorizing the font, the timestamp, the damning, meticulous record of a Tuesday night. I placed it carefully back in the pocket, folded the trousers, and placed them in the hamper. The laundry would wait. I had thinking to do. The hunt, the passive suspicion, was over. I had found my proof. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I left the trousers in the hamper, a silent bomb among the socks and t-shirts. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house like a ghost. I watered plants that didn't need it. I rearranged the spices in the cabinet alphabetically. My mind was a swarm of static, but my hands were terribly, precisely calm. Bruno, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure of his home, followed me from room to room, his tail at a hesitant half-mast. I finally sank onto the living room floor and buried my face in his fur. "What do I do?" I whispered, and he licked my ear, offering the only answer he had. The facts were these: my husband of 12 years had taken another woman to a romantic, expensive dinner. He had lied to me with effortless, rehearsed ease. The confidence I'd always loved was the very tool he'd used to blindside me. The new clothes, the running, the late texts, they weren't signs of a midlife crisis or a renewed zest for life. They were the trappings of an affair. A classic, cliched affair. I felt a surge of not just hurt, but a weird, insulting embarrassment. Were we so mundane that our catastrophe couldn't even be original? I thought about confronting him the second he walked in. I imagined slapping the receipt down on the kitchen island like a prosecutor. But a colder, more strategic part of me held back. If I showed my hand now, he would have a story ready. He would have that confident, smoothing over explanation. I needed to see more. I needed to understand the scale of the lie I was living in. So I waited. I made dinner, a pasta dish he liked. I set the table. When his key turned in the lock at 6:30, right on time, my heart hammered against my ribs so violently I thought he might hear it. "Hey, you," he said, smiling, dropping his briefcase by the door. He came to kiss me, and I turned my head at the last second so his lips landed on my cheek. I breathed in. No unfamiliar perfume. Just his soap, his starch, the faint, clean smell of him. "Rough day?" he asked, peering at me as he loosened his tie. "Just tired," I said, my voice strangely normal. "How was yours?" "Long meetings on top of meetings." He opened the fridge and grabbed a beer. "But productive. I think we are finally getting the Henderson deal across the line." Henderson. The name, once innocuous, now felt like a code word. I watched him as he talked about his day, his gestures broad and easy. He was lying. I knew it with every fiber of my being. I saw the lie in the extra beat of his eye contact, in the way he elaborated just a little too much on a meaningless detail. The horror wasn't in the suspicion anymore, it was in the knowing star. I was an audience of one, watching my husband perform the role of my faithful husband, and his performance was flawless. I ate my pasta. I laughed at a story about his inept intern. I asked follow-up questions. I was performing, too. We were two actors in a play called A Normal Tuesday Night and the set was our home, and the script was ash in my mouth. That night, as he slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the righteous, or the truly deceptive, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. The emotional impact wasn't a single wave, it was a slow, cold tide seeping into every hollow space inside me. The shock had hardened into a sharp, heavy lump of grief in my chest. This man, whose breathing pattern I knew as well as my own, was a stranger. And I was alone in our bed, married to a ghost of my own making. The confrontation was coming, but not yet. First, I had to learn how to breathe around this new, awful weight. For 3 days, I lived inside a silent film. I watched Thomas move through our life with a new, clinical detachment. Every laugh, every chore, every love you before he left the house was now a data point to be analyzed. I said nothing about the receipt. I washed the grey trousers and hung them in his closet, a returned piece of evidence. My investigation was quiet, methodical, and it made me sick with myself. I felt like a thief in my own home. One evening, while he was in the shower, I did the unthinkable. I opened the laptop he left charging on the kitchen counter. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. We'd always had an open device policy, a casual trust. Now, using it felt like a violation, but one I justified as necessary. His email password was saved. I clicked into his personal account, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't have to search for long. There, nestled between a newsletter from a running magazine and a receipt for those boots, was a confirmation email. A hotel. The Wharf Inn, dated for the upcoming Friday night, 2 nights away. It was booked under his name. A king room. Water view. The same waterfront area as the oyster bar. The shower stopped. I closed the laptop, my movements slow and deliberate against the frantic racing of my heart. I stood at the sink, filling a glass with water, as he walked into the kitchen with a towel around his waist, hair damp. "What's up?" he asked, smiling, grabbing an apple from the bowl. "Just thirsty," I said, and my voice didn't crack. "Big plans for Friday." Megan was thinking of coming over for wine. Megan was my oldest friend. She lived 3 hours away and had no such plans. A flicker. So fast anyone else would have missed it. A tiny adjustment in his stance, a microgloss that came over his eyes as he accessed the lie. "Ah, damn. I've got that thing. The late dinner with the Henderson team. It might go really late. Might even be easier to crash at a hotel downtown if we're celebrating. Don't wait up." He took a loud, crunchy bite of the apple, his gaze steady on mine. The confidence was back, full force, wrapping the lie in a package of weary professionalism. He was so good at it. The detail about the hotel, preemptively offering it, was a masterstroke. It made his Friday night absence my expectation, not his transgression. "Oh," I said, nodding, taking a sip of water. "No problem. Hope it goes well." He came over, kissed my temple, his skin smelling of our shared body wash. "You're the best. I'll make it up to you this weekend." As he walked away, the emotional impact of the infidelity shifted again. The cold grief in my chest ignited into a pure, white-hot fury. It wasn't just the act. It was the architecture of the deceit. The pre-booking, the weaving of the alibi into casual conversation, the utter calm. He was not a man caught in a passionate mistake. He was a man executing a plan. The pain was now lined with a fierce, shocking anger. I had my confirmation, and it was worse than I'd imagined. The confrontation was no longer a question of asterisk if asterisk, but of asterisk when asterisk and asterisk how star. And I knew I couldn't do it here, surrounded by our things, where he could shape the narrative. I needed neutral ground. I needed him off his script. Friday arrived, heavy and slow. Thomas dressed with particular care that morning, selecting a crisp blue shirt I'd never seen before. He hummed while he shaved. The performance of Big Meeting Day was in full swing. He kissed me goodbye, a longer kiss than usual, his hand cupping my cheek. "Wish me luck," he said, his eyes bright. "Good luck," I whispered back, my smile a tight, practice line. The moment his car pulled away, I moved. I wasn't going to wait at home. I called Megan, my voice eerily steady as I laid out the facts, the receipt, the hotel email. She offered to drive down immediately, but I told her no. "I need to do this alone. But stay by your phone." I drove the 40 minutes south, following the same route he must have taken that Tuesday. The Wharf Inn was a charming, shingled place overlooking the marina, exactly the kind of spot for a discreet, romantic rendezvous. My hands were ice on the steering wheel. I parked in the public lot adjacent to the hotel, with a clear view of the entrance. I waited. I watched the sailboats bob. I thought about all the years, the shared dreams, the quiet dinners, the way he held me when my father died. I wrapped those memories around me like armor. At 6:45 p.m., his silver sedan pulled into the hotel's porte-cochere. My breath caught. He got out, not in his work clothes, but in dark jeans and the new blazer. He looked relaxed, handsome. He handed his keys to the valet. And then he turned, not toward the lobby doors, but toward a woman getting out of a rideshare. She was pretty, young, maybe in her late 20s, with a laugh that carried across the lot. She wore a simple green dress. Thomas's face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in years, a smile of unguarded, anticipatory delight. He met her, his hand going to the small of her back, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Not a client. Not a colleague. A date. I gave them 10 minutes. Time to check in, to maybe go up to the room. Then I got out of my car, my legs feeling like wood. I walked into the cozy, nautical-themed lobby. And there they were, at the hotel bar, sitting on 2 stools, leaning toward each other, 2 glasses of white wine between them. They were in the early, sparkling stage of an evening, the story of their night just beginning to be written. I walked right up to them. Thomas saw me first. His smile didn't just fade, it vaporized. His face went through a rapid series of adjustments, shock, panic, calculation, before settling into a mask of bewildered concern. Eleanor. Honey, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? His voice was all urgent warmth. The woman in green looked from him to me, her own smile dissolving into confusion. I was in the neighborhood, I said, my voice remarkably calm. Thought I'd wish you luck on the Henderson deal in person. I turned to the woman. Hi, I'm Eleanor. Thomas's wife. And you are? The woman's eyes widened. She looked at Thomas, a question and a dawning horror in her gaze. You're married? Thomas didn't miss a beat. He stood up, placing his body slightly between us, his hands up in a placating gesture. Eleanor, this is Melissa. She's a new analyst on the Henderson team. We were just going over some last-minute figures before the dinner. He turned to Melissa, his expression one of apologetic male camaraderie. Melissa, I'm so sorry, my wife sometimes gets a little anxious when I have late meetings. This is a bit of a surprise. His lie was breathtaking. It was confident, situational, and painted me as the insecure, overreacting spouse. He reached for my arm, his grip firm. Let's talk outside, sweetheart. You've clearly gotten the wrong idea. I pulled my arm away. I looked at Melissa, who now just looked mortified and unsure. Figures, Melissa. At the wharf in bar. And the oysters last Tuesday at the oyster bar, were those figures, too. I pulled the crumpled receipt from my pocket and held it out, my hand steady. Thomas's confidence flickered. For the first time, I saw a crack in the facade, a flash of real fear in his eyes. He recovered quickly, but the recovery was visible. You went through my pockets, he said, his voice dropping, layering hurt over his performance. Eleanor, that was a client dinner. I told you. This is a massive misunderstanding, and you're embarrassing everyone. But the spell was broken. Melissa was already sliding off her stool, grabbing her purse, her face flushed with humiliation. I think I should go, she stammered, not looking at either of us. Melissa, wait, Thomas said, but it was half-hearted. His primary audience was now me. We stood in the middle of the cozy lobby, the happy hour chatter around us a stark contrast to the silent wreckage between us. The confrontation had happened. He had lied, effortlessly and well. But he had been seen. The blueprint of his secret life was now exposed, and we were both standing in its ruins. The next move was his, but the power, for the first time in months, had subtly, decisively, shifted back to me. We didn't speak in the parking lot. The silence was a thick, live wire between us. Melissa had vanished into a waiting car, and Thomas, after a few failed attempts to call after her, turned to me. The confident, smoothing over persona was gone, replaced by a stiff, pale urgency. Get in the car, he said, not a request. I drove myself. Then I'll follow you. We need to talk. Not here. I drove home, my vision strangely telescoped, seeing only the tail lights of the car in front of me. In the rearview mirror, I saw his headlights, a constant, accusing presence. Bruno's frantic welcome at the door was the only normal sound in the universe. Thomas came in behind me, closing the door softly. The house felt different, as if the confrontation had sucked all the air out, leaving a vacuum. He didn't start with excuses. He started with anger. It was a deflection, but it felt real. How could you follow me, Eleanor? How could you humiliate me like that? Do you have any idea what you've just done to a professional relationship? I took off my coat, hung it up slowly. The mundane action seemed to infuriate him more. A professional relationship, I repeated, my voice flat. You kissed her cheek, Thomas. You had your hand on her back. You booked a king room, with a water view for your professional relationship. The specificity landed. He flinched. He walked to the kitchen, poured a whiskey, neat, and downed half of it. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I asked, leaning against the doorway. I was exhausted, all the furious energy from the hotel now drained, leaving me hollow. Enlighten me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair, lying to me with every breath for weeks, and got caught. He set the glass down with a sharp click. It wasn't an affair. He ran a hand through his hair. It was a connection. It was something separate. It didn't have anything to do with us star. The emotional impact of those words was a physical blow. It didn't have anything to do with us. Our marriage, our life, was the backdrop he saw as irrelevant to his main storyline. The pain was so acute it was nauseating. She's just easy to talk to, he continued, his voice dropping into a tone of wounded confession. There's no pressure. With you, it's real life. Bills, the dog, the future. With her, it was just dinner. A few hours where I didn't have to be husband Thomas or provider Thomas. I could just be. He was painting himself as the victim of our stable life. The sheer audacity of it unlocked my voice. So this is my fault. Our good, stable life was so oppressive you had to cheat. You didn't come to me, your wife and say you felt stifled. You just went out and got a newer, easier model for a few hours a week. It wasn't like that, he insisted, his confidence returning in a wave of self-justification. Nothing physical even happened, Eleanor. Not really. A few kisses. It was emotional, more than anything. I laughed, a short, broken sound. The hotel room was for emotional support, then. The oysters were for deep conversation. Don't insult us both by pretending this was some platonic meetup. You planned it. You lied. You looked me in the eye and fabricated a whole other world. He was silent for a long moment, staring into his whiskey. The fight seemed to seep out of him, replaced by a dawning, sick realization. The evidence was incontrovertible, and his lies were circling back to choke him. I'm sorry, he said, and for the first time, it sounded stripped bare. Not a tactical apology, but a small, shameful thing. The words hung in the air. Sorry. Sorry for what? For doing it. For getting caught. For the specific lies, or for the whole, rotten architecture of betrayal. The emotional journey in that moment wasn't linear. The shock was gone. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But now, washing over it, was a profound, devastating sadness. I looked at him, the man I'd loved, built a home with, trusted, and I saw a stranger who was suddenly, terribly sorry. The man who had been so confident in his deception was now visibly crumbling in the wreckage of it. The impact wasn't just his infidelity. It was the death of the man I thought he was. The husband I had was gone. Who was left in this kitchen, apologizing, was someone I didn't know yet. And I had no idea if I wanted to. The days that followed were a study in surreal domesticity. We moved around each other like satellites with broken guidance systems, orbiting the same space, but locked in separate, silent trajectories. His confidence was gone, replaced by a watchful, careful penitence. He'd make coffee and leave a cup for me on the counter. He'd take Bruno for extra long walks. He'd try to catch my eye, his own full of a pleading remorse that felt like another performance, albeit a more desperate one. I didn't cry much. I felt scooped out, numb. The emotional impact had moved from the sharp, stabbing pain of discovery to a deep, bone-aching bruise. I went to work. I answered emails. I cooked meals we picked at in silence. The house, once a place of easy clutter and comfort, felt hollow, every sound echoing too loudly. The lies had stopped, but the truth was now a vast, unmanageable landscape between us. We hadn't decided to stay together. We just hadn't decided to break apart. It was a state of limbo, and the inertia of 12 years was a powerful force. One night, about a week after the hotel, I was in the living room pretending to read a book. Thomas came in and sat in his armchair, not his usual spot on the sofa next to me. He didn't speak for a long time. I ended it, he said finally, his voice rough. With Melissa. Completely. I told her it was a mistake, that I am a married man who lost his way. He was staring at his hands. She didn't know, Eleanor. Not really. I'd shaded the truth. She's not a villain. I didn't care about Melissa. Her role in this was over. My husband was the architect. Why? I asked, closing the book. It was the only question that mattered now. Not about the logistics, but the core. Why did you lose your way? He sighed, a heavy, ragged sound. The easy justifications were gone. What was left seemed painfully inadequate. I think. I stopped feeling seen. And that's no excuse, he added quickly, holding up a hand. It's my failure. I stopped talking. I started wanting to feel admired again, I guess. Novel. It was stupid. It was vain. It was a way to feel powerful without doing any of the hard work of being vulnerable here, with you. His words, for the first time, didn't sound like a lie. They sounded shamefully, embarrassingly true. It wasn't about oppression, or a lack of love. It was about a fragility in him, a hunger for external validation that he'd been too proud, or too scared, to address within the complex, familiar confines of our marriage. The emotional impact shifted again. The anger softened at the edges, just slightly, diluted by a terrible wave of pity. I pitied his weakness. I pitied the small, insecure man hiding behind all that polished confidence. And in pitying him, I felt the first, faint detachment from the pain. He had done this not because I was lacking, but because he was. I don't know who you are, I said quietly, voicing the core of my despair. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I know. And I am so desperately sorry for that. I want to show you. I will spend every day trying to show you who I am, and who I want to be, if you'll let me. It wasn't a decision. It was a door cracking open. A possibility. The hollow house echoed with it. For the first time since I found the receipt, I didn't look at him and see only the betrayal. I saw the shattered pieces of the man I'd loved, and the faint, frightening question of whether they could be gathered into something whole, something new. The journey from shock and anger was leading me somewhere I hadn't expected, to a crossroads of cold, clear-eyed choice. The door that cracked open didn't lead to a sunlit path. It opened into a dim, messy workshop where the tools were unfamiliar and our hands were clumsy. We decided, without any grand pronouncement, to try. Not to fix what was broken, we both sensed that particular vase could never be fully reassembled, but to see if we could build a new container, something functional and maybe, in time, beautiful again. It began with rules. My rules. They weren't negotiable, and for the first time in years, I held the line with a calm, unshakable authority that surprised us both. 1. Full transparency. Passwords, phone access, location sharing, all of it. He handed over his devices without a word. The confidence he'd wielded like a weapon was now disassembled at my feet. 2. Individual therapy. For him, immediately. For me, soon after. We needed separate translators for our pain before we could hope to speak to each other. 3. No sweeping under the rug. We would talk, in scheduled, dreaded sessions, with a couples counselor starting in 1 month. No more avoiding the hard things. He agreed to everything, his eagerness tinged with relief. Action was easier than sitting in the shame. He found a therapist. He came home on time, every time. He was solicitous, attentive, a shadow of his former self. And I hated it. This meek, accommodating man was almost more alien than the lying cheat had been. Where was his spine? The emotional impact now included a layer of contempt, which scared me more than anger. The first unexpected event came 2 weeks in. It was a Saturday. We were attempting the impossible, a normal errand to the garden center. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, our conversation a stilted exchange about potting soil and annuals. Then, we rounded a corner of shelving, and there she was. Melissa. She was holding a flat of marigolds, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, no trace of the green dress woman. She froze. Thomas froze. I felt my own body lock up, a cold wave washing over me. Melissa's eyes darted from Thomas's horrified face to mine. There was no anger in her gaze, just a profound, awkward pity. For me. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, not at us, but at the sheer misery of the situation. Then she simply turned and walked quickly down another aisle, abandoning her flowers. The confidence Thomas had been slowly trying to rebuild crumpled. He looked physically ill. Eleanor, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I know you didn't, I cut him off, my voice surprisingly steady. This wasn't a planned meeting. It was a cosmic accident, a brutal reminder that the fallout of his choices existed in the real world, beyond our living room. The pain was fresh again, a sharp reopening of the wound. But a strange thing happened later that night. The raw shock of the encounter faded, and in its place was a clear, cold realization. Melissa was just a person. A person who had believed a convincing man's lies. Seeing her in the harsh, fluorescent light of a garden center, holding marigolds, she was demystified. She wasn't a villain or a goddess. She was a prop in Thomas's story of himself. I looked at him, slumped in his chair, consumed by guilt. The contempt I'd felt softened, just a fraction, into something more complex. His affair wasn't about a grand passion. It was about a profound smallness in him. And that smallness was his to carry, not mine. The emotional journey was turning inward. The fury was burning down to embers, and I was left standing in the ash, asking myself the hardest question, did I want to stay? Not out of fear, or habit, or even love as I once knew it, but out of a chosen, conscious desire to see what could be built from this wreckage. The answer wasn't yes. But for the first time, it wasn't a deafening asterisk no star. It was a whisper of asterisk maybe asterisk, and I decided, for now, to follow it. The couple's counselor's office was beige and softly lit, with two opposing sage-green sofas, and the obligatory box of tissues on the low table between them. It felt like a stage set for the most painful play ever written. We arrived separately, a deliberate choice. I watched Thomas's car pull into the lot after mine, saw him sit for a moment, gathering himself. The confidence was still absent, in its place was a grim determination. Dr. Alvarez was a woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a voice that invited confession without demanding it. She didn't let us hide. Eleanor, she began, turning to me. What is your goal for being here? I hadn't prepared an answer. The truth tumbled out, raw and simple. I want to not feel sick every time I look at him. I want to know if the last 12 years were a story I told myself. Thomas flinched as if struck. Dr. Alvarez nodded, then turned to him. Thomas. Your goal. He cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. I want to earn back her trust. I want to understand why I did what I did, so I can guarantee it will never, ever happen again. It sounded rehearsed, but the tremor in his voice was real. Good, Dr. Alvarez said. Those are honest places to start. Today, we won't solve anything. We'll just try to put one truth on the table. Thomas, can you tell Eleanor, without justification, what you did? This was the first rule of the new world, name the sin. No more mistake, or connection, or something separate. He turned to look at me, his face pale. I had an affair, he said, the word hanging in the beige air, ugly and final. I was emotionally and physically unfaithful. I pursued a relationship with another woman. I planned dates, I kissed her, I booked a hotel room with the intention of sleeping with her. I lied to you, consistently and deliberately, to hide it. Hearing the bald facts, stripped of his usual eloquent gloss, was a new kind of shock. It was merciful in its brutality. This was the thing. Not a vibe, or a glaze, or a suspicion. A series of conscious, betraying actions. Why? Dr. Alvarez asked, gently steering him away from just the facts and back to the fragile why he'd begun to touch at home. He struggled. I saw the old patterns, the desire to shape a narrative, to explain in a way that might elicit sympathy. He started to say, I felt unseen, but then stopped. He looked at my face, and saw the flinch there. He took a shaky breath. Because I was selfish, he said, redirecting. Because I was chasing a feeling, a high, and I valued that more than I valued your peace or our vows. Because I was a coward, who would rather create a secret life than do the work to improve the one I had. He was crying now, soundlessly, which was worse than sobbing. Because I took you for granted. Because I thought I could have both, and I was too arrogant to think I'd get caught. It wasn't the full, profound answer. That would take months in his own therapy. But it was the first fully accountable thing he'd said. It didn't center his unmet needs. It centered his choices. Dr. Alvarez turned to me. Eleanor, what do you hear him saying? I was silent for a long time, weighing the words. I hear that he knows the right nouns and verbs to use, I said finally, my tone not bitter, but exhausted. I don't know if I believe he feels the true weight of them yet. Thomas nodded, wiping his face with the heel of his hand. That's fair. That's completely fair. The session was an hour of excruciating, careful work. We didn't yell. We didn't even cry much after that first burst. We just began the tedious process of deconstructing the bomb that had gone off in our living room, sorting through the shrapnel piece by painful piece. Walking out, the late afternoon sun felt aggressively bright. We stood by our cars. Thank you, he said quietly. For being there. For listening. I'm not doing it for you, I said, the honesty coming easier now, sharp but clean. I'm doing it for me. To see if there's a path for me here. I know, he said. And for the first time, I believed he did know. His confidence was gone, but in its place was a glimmer of something else. A sober understanding of the devastation he'd caused, and the sheer scale of the mountain he had to climb if he ever hoped to be in my sight again. The emotional impact that night was a deep, weary ache. But it was a different kind of ache. It wasn't the chaotic, searing pain of fresh betrayal. It was the soreness that comes after setting a broken bone, pain with a purpose, the first sign of a grueling healing process beginning. We had spoken the truth in a neutral room. We had survived it. It was a small, terrible, and necessary start. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a climate you learn to live in. It took a year and a half. 18 months of therapy sessions that left us drained, of conversations that started with when you, and I felt, of learning the map of each other's pain so well we could navigate it in the dark. There were setbacks, a song on the radio, a forgotten anniversary of a betrayal I'd marked on my mental calendar, a flash of insecurity that would make me ask a question I already knew the answer to. He would answer, every time, with patience, not with the old, confident gloss, but with a steady, proven honesty. The man who emerged wasn't the confident lie spinner, or the meek penitent. He was quieter. Softer around the edges. He'd learned to express uncertainty, to say I don't know, or I need to think about that. His confidence, when it returned, was different. It was the confidence to be vulnerable, to show up for the hard, unsexy work of a Tuesday night. He found validation in repairing a leaky faucet, in remembering to call my mother on her birthday, in sitting through a movie he hated because I wanted to see it. My forgiveness didn't come as a grand pronouncement. One Tuesday, over a very ordinary meatloaf, I realized the sick feeling was gone. I looked at him telling a story about his therapy session, not to score points, but because it was part of his day, and I didn't see the ghost of Melissa, or the hotel receipt. I saw Thomas. Flawed, profoundly sorry, trying. The love I felt wasn't the same giddy, trusting love of before. It was sturdier. Sadder, in ways. But wider. It had made room for his failure and my anger and the long march back. We decided to stay together not because we had to, but because, after sifting through the rubble, we found blueprints for a house we both still wanted to live in. The compromises weren't about ignoring pain, they were about building new rhythms around its scar tissue. We instituted a monthly check-in, over coffee, no phones, a space for grievances and appreciations alike. We fiercely protected the individual lives we'd neglected, my book club, his hiking trips with friends. Our marriage became a choice we made actively, every day, not an assumption we drifted in. *** Conclusion. The hard won son asterisk asterisk. What did we learn? We learned that trust, once broken, doesn't regenerate. It is rebuilt, brick by brick, with new materials. It is always, in some corner, a new construction site. We learned that infidelity is less about a lack of love for a partner, and more about a sickness within the self, a failure of character, a poverty of courage. The advice we'd offer, if anyone were foolish enough to ask, is this: there is no going back. Only through. You must be willing to stare at the rotten beams in your foundation without flinching. The betrayed partner must find their voice and their bottom line, and hold them with absolute force. The unfaithful partner must surrender their ego, completely, and become a student of the pain they've caused. It is brutal, unfair work. Most couples shouldn't do it. But for us, in our specific, broken story, we did. I forgave him. Not for him, but for me. To put down the heavy weight of my anger so I could pick up my life again. The forgiveness was my release, not his absolution. And in that release, we found a surprising second chance, not at the marriage we had, but at a different, more conscious one. It's not better than before. It's just more true. We live in the weather of it now, no longer fearing the storm, because we learned, the hardest way possible, how to build a shelter together.